Barker. Thank you very much for being here today. It's a pleasure to welcome you at the French residence.
Thank you for having me.
In London. So you're a photographer, so you've been working for the past 10 years on the issue of plastic pollution. So you've been published in many magazines, you've won many prizes, and I believe people are going to be able to see your pictures in France.
Yes, Photoclimate, which is in Bastille. And this is kind of an eco-concept, so the actual structure and everything that is used to put the images there has been used before and will be used again after the exhibition.
Okay, so maybe to start with, could you tell us how you first got into photography? What drew you towards this artistic discipline?
Yeah, well, I think it was my own kind of concern for seeing plastic on the shoreline. I'm from the east coast of England, from Hull, and I used to walk on the beaches as a child and collect shells and things like that, like everybody did. And I began to notice waste washing up on the shoreline, especially plastic, for about the last 20 years, and wondered where it came from and if other people knew about it. Always sort of conscious that I would like to let people know what was happening on my local beach, but didn't really know how to do it. And that coincided with me doing a photography course. So I began to collect the plastic and then think of ideas and ways to photograph the plastic to engage people.
So photography has been the medium through which you've showcased your environmentalism or your concerns about the environment.
Yes, I've always been interested in photography from being very young. My father brought me a camera when I was about 13. I used to print photographs in the bathroom at home. And then I became a graphic designer for a big part of my life. And then I realised that I always really liked photography and it was something I wanted to return to. So later in life I went back to study photography, and this happened to coincide with when I saw all the plastic sort of washing up. And I decided that this would be a really good vehicle to let people know what was going on.
Yeah, so obviously we've all seen plastic bottles washing up on the beach, or that sort of everyday pollution that we see. But how big? What is the extent of the plastic pollution crisis that we hear about a lot in the news?
I mean, 300 million tonnes of plastic waste is created every year, and more than 8 million tonnes end up in the sea. So it's a huge problem, and it's a global problem. You know, we're all individually responsible. When we collect plastic from the shorelines or whatever, and what I photograph, there's no knowing of where it entered the ocean and where it's travelled from and to. So we're all kind of responsible for our consumption of plastic and how we dispose of it. And, you know, unfortunately, where it ends up, you know, that could be in the stomach of a bird or a fish or, you know, whatever that might be.
First, could you take us through your process? So you have a very distinct style of photography, which is very intriguing, quite beautiful in a way. When you see the plastic, it's set up in a way that makes it very sort of mesmerizing.
Yes.
So how do you create those photos, if that's something you could talk about?
Well, that's the main reason that I photograph like that, is to create something beautiful and something attractive that people will look at, and they'll be drawn into the image, and then they'll read what it represents and hopefully be really shocked by what they're reading and what they're seeing in the images. Initially I used to photograph things as I found them on the shoreline, like a kind of a documentary image, but because people are kind of used to seeing waste, unfortunately, you know, at the side of the road or fly tipped or wherever it might be, it didn't really engage the viewer very long. They kind of switched off and they weren't really interested in seeing it as it was on the shoreline. So what I do is I collect it and take it back to the studio, and I photograph it on a black background. I sprinkle the smaller pieces of objects kind of randomly on the black background first, and then the medium-sized pieces, and then the larger pieces, and then those three layers are kind of sandwiched together.
It's only one photo that you take. I mean, what you see on the photo is something that's actually here, like in the studio. That's what it looks like as well.
Yes, I mean, it's comprised of about 3 layers. So the small bits, the medium and the large, are all compressed together. So it kind of creates this suspension, and I'm trying to sort of show almost like a containment of a mass of plastic and what exists out there.
And you've also created a series in which you built a camera out of the plastic you found on the shore.
Yes, yeah, that's right, yeah. Plastic was collected from 9 different continents, from 9 different oceans, and I was lucky enough to have a photographic tutor who helped me with the idea, and him and his brother actually made the camera for me. And this is something that I took to Henderson Island, which is one of my expeditions, and I actually used the camera made from plastic debris to photograph the plastic debris on the island of Henderson.
Going on those expeditions, did you change your awareness of the plastic issue?
What I was finding that I was collecting up on the shorelines around Europe was quite similar to what I was seeing on the other side of the world, for example in Hong Kong and in the North Pacific Ocean. It was the same single-use plastics, you know, but with different languages maybe printed on more of. But yeah, the first expedition I did was in 2012, and it was to sail through the tsunami debris field in the North Pacific Ocean a year and 3 months after the Japanese tsunami. So that was with educators and scientists who were doing studies to determine how long plastic existed in the ocean and about rafting organisms and things like that, because they knew exactly what date the plastic left land after the tsunami, and they could do a lot of research into that. And I created a series of work called Shoal, and it was based on every piece of plastic that was bought on board the yacht over a 32-day period. So it was a tough expedition.
You've done a series, I think, on footballs that you have come ashore from all throughout the world.
Yes.
And so you've been working with scientists and educators, and how do you feel about solutions to this issue that seems very daunting and
yeah, I mean, starting with the penalty series, I decided it would be a really good idea to get people involved in collecting the plastic rather than just me collecting it all the time. So I got people via social media. I put a call out to people to collect footballs and post them to me. And in the end, I got 769 footballs sent to me from all over the world, which I photographed in my studio at home. And this was at the time of the World Cup, so it raised awareness at the time of the World Cup, which was a good kind of global engagement at that time. You know, that helps awareness if people are involved in collecting for me. You know, the word spreads, and that's another way of engagement. In terms of what we have to do, you know, governments have to come together and create international legislation on a global scale, because it's a global issue. And if, you know, one country on one side of the world is doing a lot and it's somewhere that's pumping out so much plastic isn't, it's not going to be solved unless we all come together and have, you know, legislation in place. And
so I suppose what anyone can do to sort of help with this issue at a very small scale is to go on maybe go on a beach or the banks of a river and sort of pick up what they find. And there's something very rewarding in that, because at the end of the day you can say, well, today I've picked up 30 kilograms of plastic, and over a year maybe it'll be like 200 kilograms. But as an artist, it's very difficult because you've raised awareness with like a lot of people. So probably you could say that you've inspired lots of people to pick up plastic, but you can't. At the end of the day, you can't really. I suppose it's difficult for you to find to measure the result of your action with the metrics. So is that important for you? How do you manage to stay motivated to work on this issue, which, well, oftentimes it seems like a drop in the ocean, the work we do on those issues?
Yeah, I think going back to your comments about cleaning up and, you know, people being rewarded about cleaning up, you know, that is a good thing to do, obviously, to clean up areas. But I think by cleaning up, we've gone too far already, because the plastic has entered the rivers and entered the oceans. And what we need to do is to prevent the plastic from actually entering the oceans and entering the rivers. When we design a container or an object, we need to think about what happens to that at the end of life once it's been used. And if it's possible to make it with a carbon zero footprint, and then it's recoverable and it's you know, somehow used again, you know, refilled, or it's made from a product that, you know, does actually decompose properly, then this is one of the solutions. What I've seen has really affected me. You know, when I see birds being cut open and plastic being pulled from their stomachs, and this being a reason why, you know, they're threatened as a species. You know, I've got to be mindful for my own personal level. Also, when I produce my work, it's very important that my work is produced in a way that's not wasteful, you know, that my work can travel to other places, like in France. And the way and the structure, the materials that are used, they're not, you know, to be wasted.
So your work reaches out to a lot of people, and so I believe through some of your exhibitions you've been able to reach out to a large number of people, not by them not being on a museum, but also by being in open spaces or in beaches where you're directly affected by plastic pollution.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important to me, that all my work isn't seen in a gallery setting, because, you know, some people might not be comfortable with visiting a gallery. So, for example, in Houlgate in Normandy in France last year, I had an exhibition, La Femme exposition there, and my images were blown up really big and exhibited on the beach. So people could, when they visited as tourists, or, you know, the local community could see my work freely on the beach and think about what was happening out at sea. Also, I'm very keen to engage with the younger generation, because you know, these are the people that are going to be left with the problem that we've created. And it was really good to see lots of school children being shown around the work when it was exhibited there. And the work eventually went on to be gifted to schools and communities in Houlgate.
And what sort of reaction do you often come across among the people who see your photos for the first time? Is it surprise? Do they find it beautiful? Like, what sort of comments do you get?
It varies. Some people cry in my exhibitions. They're so moved by what they see. You know, some of my images show toothbrushes and inkjet cartridges, golf balls that have been recovered from the stomach of albatross chicks, things like that. So people are really upset by the fact, you know, how it's affecting nature. But generally people are drawn in, I think, because of the aesthetic quality. And then when they read the captions, which is most important to me, and the stories and the science and the research behind what I'm doing.
That it's a real, not only beautiful, but actually
it's not just art for art's sake.
Yeah.
It does actually have a message and a, you know, something that needs to be followed on, and that action needs to be taken.
And so do you have interactions with politicians and decision makers, and what's your relationship?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've had, you know, my work exhibited in Parliament, in lots of political areas. I've spoken for Green Week this year, ahead of COP26, and I'm involved with a lot of things that are going on surrounding COP26. So, yeah, it's a time for me to get my work out there, to talk about what I'm doing, to talk about the problems, and try and engage politicians and world leaders to actually think about the problem. And I want everyone to take the issue seriously. You know, it's a huge problem. It affects the marine environment, you know, fish, birds, ecosystems. It affects the economy through cleanups. It's a climate issue change because you know, from extraction through manufacture to production to recycling, you know, fossil fuels are being used. So it's a key climate change issue. It needs to be addressed, and it needs world leaders to sit together and create a world, you know, legislation. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Mandy Barker, for being here with us today. Hopefully, perhaps we'll see you in Paris later this year.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for the opportunity for me to raise more awareness.
Oh, can you see how happy we